Seeing stray dogs tend to break a lot of people's hearts, and it wasn't so different for Daisy. After seeing this stray Labrador at the park for 5 days straight, Daisy had decided that she wanted to adopt this animal. So she was set on winning its trust with food and toys, and this seemed to work perfectly. But as she was petting it, she realized that the dog actually had a collar around its neck. Daisy could not believe it when she got a better look at it. Daisy was shocked when she suddenly felt it while petting the stray dog. Did the dog always have a collar around its neck? So did that mean that the dog actually had an owner, a human looking for it? Daisy immediately turned to her husband. She could barely believe what she was seeing. There was no name, address, or even a phone number on the tag. But Daisy's husband still immediately knew what he was looking at, and that they had to take action right away. The dog had obviously not been a stray for long, but no one seemed to recognize the animal. He stayed in the park and rarely left, especially once people started putting out food and water. Daisy and her neighbors hoped to lure the dog over time to see if he had any information on his collar. But they kept running into the same problem with their plan. Daisy studied his habits from day to day and came to a sad conclusion. Daisy realized that the dog didn't trust any of them. He never let anyone get close. Animal Services Daisy called Animal Services about the dog, but they told her that they didn't have the resources to help find his owner. They were willing to take him in though. But when Daisy asked for additional information about how they handled stray dogs, she immediately changed her mind. Calling for help had been a mistake. Animal Services told Daisy that they would bring the dog to a shelter. Daisy was shocked to hear that the shelter put down dogs that weren't adopted within 5 days. It seemed like such a short period of time. Daisy refused to give Animal Services the location of the dog and hung up. She would have to find a solution on her own. Even after the other neighbors lost interest in the dog, Daisy kept going to the park to feed the dog and check on him. She started to look forward to seeing him every day, and the dog became more and more comfortable with her. Daisy had never wanted a pet before, but she talked to her husband about adopting the stray. Her husband agreed that they could take in the dog. It would be a lot of work, but they were both excited. Daisy and her husband John went to the store and bought wet food, some toys, and a bag of treats that they hoped would interest the dog. They'd found him in the park by the picnic tables and showed the dog what they'd bought. Daisy couldn't believe how the dog reacted. The dog seemed happy to see her and was obviously interested in the food they'd brought. But what really surprised Daisy was that the dog was willing to come closer without her calling him over. Daisy was so excited to give the dog a better home than he'd ever had before. As much as she wanted to bring the dog home, Daisy knew that she needed to stick to the plan. In the past, Daisy had just left food out and backed away to give the dog some space. This time, she put the food down and then sat by it. After the dog was done eating, he didn't rush off. Daisy reached out and ran her fingers over his fur. That's when she felt something unexpected. The dog was too hungry to resist the food and slowly crept closer. Daisy could see that his muscles were tense. Before the dog got spooked, Daisy rotated the collar to look for a tag. She found a rectangular one on the other side that almost seemed too large for the collar. She was expecting to see the owner's phone number or the information for a vet, but when she read it, she could barely believe her eyes. The tag was stamped with what appeared to be a username and password. There wasn't a name or a link to any website. At first, Daisy thought it must have been an identifier for some kind of pet tracking service. But then she saw the third line of text and gasped. Daisy held the dog and waved at John to come closer. She showed him the string of numbers on the collar, and they agreed that they had to be coordinates. Daisy thought that maybe they showed the location of the owner's home, but that didn't explain the username and password. John looked up the coordinates online and found an address. The dog was completely settled by then, so Daisy and John decided that the best thing to do was bring the dog along while they checked out the location. Maybe they would even find the dog's owner and have a chance to verify that the dog was being treated well. They put the dog in the car and set out in the direction of the house. Daisy and John were both quiet. They'd wanted the dog and had grown quite attached. It didn't take long to cross town. The dog was obviously used to riding in a car and seemed comfortable at the back seat. As soon as they got closer, however, the dog grew excited and stared out the window. He seemed to recognize where they were going. The closer they got to the address, the more the neighborhood seemed to change. They were getting to the industrial side of town, with hardly any trees around. It worsened even further, as Daisy could spot more and more abandoned houses. She was starting to get a really bad feeling about this. When they went on for 5 more minutes, the address had to be very close. They were sure that this had to be the place, so John parked the car in front. John got out quickly, so that the sounds of the barking wouldn't leave the car too much. He casually walked up to the house and knocked on the door, after he couldn't find any doorbell. Daisy eagerly and nervously watched every move from a distance. They waited, but nobody was opening the door. The animal jumped from the back seat over Daisy's lap through the window onto the lawn. The Labrador was gone before Daisy could fully process what was going on. The dog stayed there for a second, but soon after it started to charge the house at full speed. John saw him coming as he was looking in the direction of the car, but there was no way he was going to stop the animal. The dog went onto the side of the house, passing John on his way, and jumped through a broken window to get inside. Daisy had quickly gotten out of the car, and at this point, she started to panic a little bit. What were they supposed to do now? Could they go after the dog, or would that be considered breaking and entering? She wanted more than anything now to solve this mystery, and was hoping to find any owner of this house in the backyard. There was a back door, and it appeared to be open. Daisy felt like she was at a crossroads here. Was she really going to enter an unknown house in a potentially dangerous neighborhood? But first, it would be wise to call over John over to the back. With heavy crackling, the door opened, although Daisy was not sure if this door would ever close anymore. They got inside, carefully, and it quickly became quite obvious that no person had been living here in the last years. The walls were covered with dust and most items seemed old or destroyed. The whole place had an unpleasant atmosphere, and Daisy started to question more and more why this dog was so attached to the house. Was the dog living here all this time, alone? And why does the Labrador have the coordinates to this place hanging around his neck? It had to be that somebody was, or had been, here. The whole bottom floor was empty, and no clues could be found regarding any living person or dog. John did find the stairs to the upper floor, however. They went up with speed, and in the bedroom, at the top of the stairs, Daisy saw the friendly Labrador lying on the bed. It appeared that the dog was not alone. Next to it, under the blankets, was an old and weak-looking man petting the animal. The man did not look up at first when the couple entered the room, and he looked in bad shape. After a while, he did notice Daisy and John in the corner of the room. He looked spooked, while the two did not know what to do. The Labrador, on the other hand, only acted very excited to see them again. This helped the old man to calm down again, and after a little while, the three started talking. The dog was actually named Jacko, and it was a Labrador that belonged to the previous owners. Apparently, they had left Jacko behind with the house. The man had before been homeless for decades, but when he took shelter one night in this abandoned place, he and the dog met, and they bonded soon enough. The old man was not the one responsible for the coordinates around Jacko's neck. The collar was already put there by the previous owners, and he just let it stay there. As long as he was here, he wanted the dog brought back to him if anyone found Jacko. At least that was up until 1 week ago. Since the last week, the old homeless man had felt his health going downhill fast. He had the feeling that his end was near, and it had felt better to pass away without Jacko by his side. For this reason, he asked an old friend of his to take Jacko and drop him off at the park, at which he could happily find a new life to live. The old man was hoping for someone to take a liking in the Labrador. He told Daisy and John that it would be his last wish for them to adopt the dog and take care of Jacko as good as possible. He'd appreciated that they brought the animal here so that he could say goodbye one more time. But after that, it was time for them to separate. The couple, surprised to hear all of this, offered the man a ride to a hospital. He refused, explaining that he was done with life and now just wanted to leave this world in peace. It was very difficult for the two to leave him behind as they did, but seeing his eyes fill with emotion after Daisy told him they'd gladly adopt the dog as his final wish spoke volumes. They looked at Jacko and knew this was the right decision.